In the glittering halls of Tennessee's most prestigious boarding school, a wealthy socialite publicly humiliates a deaf-mute cleaning lady, tearing her clothes and exposing her to ridicule. What no one expects is for an autistic girl who has never spoken in public to suddenly stand up and shout, "Stop, she saved me." But saved her from what? And at what cost? For 7 years, Maria Lucia has silently watched from the shadows, scrubbing floors and fading into invisibility. She surrendered her voice, her career, and her identity to protect a child no one else would believe. Now, as long-buried secrets threaten to surface, the powerful Bradford family will stop at nothing to keep her silent forever. This is a story about the courage it takes to stand up to power, the strength found in silence, and the earth-shattering impact of 4 simple words: I believe you. Follow us to uncover the truth that wealth tried to bury, and witness the moment when those without a voice finally make themselves heard. If you're watching this, don't forget to follow our channel, hit like, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The truth deserves to be shared. The muffled sound of a rag being wrung out, the sharp smell of bleach burning the air. The camera pans slowly through a corridor of white marble and expensive chandeliers until it focuses on the trembling hands of Maria Lucia, a 52-year-old cleaning lady, wiping the floor of a luxurious boarding school in Tennessee. She's deaf-mute. Her world is silence, but her gaze says it all: exhaustion, dignity, and something else that nobody there seems to see. It's Saturday night. In the main hall, wealthy mothers circulate in glittering dresses with champagne flutes, participating in a charity event organized by Evelyn Bradford, socialite, billionaire, and mother of one of the school's directors. Evelyn walks proudly. When crossing the hall, she steps on a small wet spot on the floor. She slips slightly and her Hermes bag gets dirty. The room falls silent for a second. Evelyn turns slowly, looks at Maria kneeling with a bucket and rag, and says in a cutting tone, "She ruined my bag. This dirty woman. Where did she get those rags she's wearing?" Maria lowers her head, but a piece of her improvised bra shows beneath her worn-out uniform, made from a scrap of Evelyn's blouse discarded months before. The billionaire, overcome with hatred and to entertain the other mothers, violently pulls Maria's apron and tears it in front of everyone, revealing the hand-sewn garment. Laughter, cameras, shame, until a voice shouts, "Stop." It's a girl on stage. Sophia, 13 years old, an autistic student who had never spoken in public in her life. The room freezes. Sophia stares at Evelyn with teary eyes and repeats, "Don't touch her. She saved me." The crowd gasps. Mothers clutch their pearls. Phones flash like lightning as everyone turns toward the stage. Sophia's hands tremble, but her voice doesn't. It cuts through the thick silence like a knife through butter. Maria's eyes widen in shock. For 7 years, she had kept her head down, invisible by choice. The marble floor beneath her knees suddenly feels colder as the weight of all eyes falls upon her. A single tear slides down her weathered cheek, not from humiliation, but from fear of what would come next. Evelyn's perfectly sculpted face twists with confusion, her manicured hand still clutching the torn fabric. "What did you say?" she demands, her voice pitched higher than usual. Sophia steps forward, closer to the microphone. Her school counselor rushes toward her but stops short when the girl speaks again. "She saved me when no one else was looking," Sophia says, her words deliberate and clear despite her never speaking publicly before. "And you?" As she points at Evelyn, "You just want people to look at you." The room erupts in whispers. Someone drops a champagne glass, and it shatters against the floor, the sound like a gunshot in the tense silence that follows. David Bradford, Evelyn's son and school director, emerges from the crowd. His face is ashen, eyes darting between his mother, Maria, and the girl on stage. "That's enough," he announces, forcing a smile. "Let's continue with our program. Security will handle this." Unfortunate situation. 2 security guards approach Maria, but Sophia screams, "No!" The sound so raw and primal that everyone freezes again. Maria rises slowly from the floor, dignity somehow intact despite her exposure. Her hands move in a graceful dance, sign language that no one there understands except Sophia, whose eyes follow every movement. "What is she saying?" Someone whispers too loudly. Sophia translates, her voice gaining strength with each word. "She says she doesn't need your charity. She needs your humanity." Evelyn scoffs, recovering her composure. "How touching. A mute cleaning lady and an autistic child causing a scene at my event. David, handle this now." But David hesitates, his eyes locked on Maria's face. There's recognition there, and unmistakable fear. Maria makes one final gesture before security reaches her. This time, Sophia doesn't translate. She doesn't have to. The message is clear in Maria's eyes, in the set of her jaw, in the straight line of her shoulders as she allows herself to be escorted out. This isn't over. As Maria is led away, a small object falls from her pocket. A folded photograph that slides across the polished floor, stopping at Evelyn's designer heel. The billionaire picks it up, unfolds it, and her face drains of color. "Mother?" David asks, seeing her reaction. "What is it?" Evelyn crumples the photo in her fist, her knuckles white with strain. "Nothing," she says too quickly. "Just trash. Like her." But as the crowd's attention returns to the interrupted program, a young server notices Evelyn slipping the crumpled photo into her clutch, her hand shaking so badly she nearly drops it. Outside in the cool Tennessee night, Maria sits on a bench, waiting for the bus. Her uniform is still torn, but her expression is resolute. A text message lights up her old phone. "They don't know what we know, but they will. Soon." She stares at the message for a long moment, then deletes it. She doesn't need the reminder. She's been carrying this secret for 7 years, like a stone in her heart. Tonight the weight has shifted. The first crack has appeared in the wall of silence, and behind that wall lies a truth that could bring the entire Bradford empire crumbling down. The grand ballroom of Westbrook Academy descended into chaos. The charity auction's carefully orchestrated elegance shattered like fine crystal, replaced by the frantic energy of scandal. Parents huddled in whispered conversations, smartphones raised high to capture every moment of the unfolding drama. The school's board members moved with practiced urgency, attempting to contain what was quickly becoming uncontainable. Evelyn Bradford stood frozen in the center of it all, her designer gown gleaming under the chandeliers, her smile now brittle and forced. The torn apron still dangled from her manicured fingers like incriminating evidence. Her eyes darted between her son David, who had gone deathly pale, and Sophia, who remained on stage, defiant and trembling. Maria, clutching the remnants of her uniform to her chest, tried to back away from the spotlight that had suddenly and unwillingly found her. Her weathered hands shook as she gathered her cleaning supplies, her movements quick and practiced, the instinct of someone accustomed to making herself invisible. But before she could disappear into the service corridor, Sophia leapt from the stage with surprising agility. "Wait!" The girl's voice cracked with emotion as she pushed through the crowd. Several guests gasped, not just at the interruption, but at hearing Sophia speak at all. For most of them, the girl had been merely a silent shadow in the school hallways, known only as the Bradford Scholarship Case, a charitable tax write-off for the wealthy family. Sophia reached Maria and grabbed her hand with surprising strength. The physical connection between them sent a visible current through both bodies, comfort for one, courage for the other. For the first time that evening, the crowd truly looked at Maria, not as a fixture of the building like the marble floors or crystal chandeliers, but as a woman with depth, with history, with secrets. "She protected me," Sophia announced, her voice growing stronger with each word. When no one else was watching, when no one else cared. David Bradford finally broke from his trance and surged forward. "That's enough, Sophia. This isn't the place." "Then where is the place?" the girl challenged, her normally soft voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Your office? Where you shredded my letters? Where you deleted my emails?" A collective intake of breath rippled through the crowd. Evelyn's social smile completely collapsed. "Security." David snapped his fingers, and 2 men in dark suits materialized from the periphery. "Please escort Ms. Lucia from the premises. Her services are no longer required tonight." Maria made no resistance as the guards approached. She simply squeezed Sophia's hand once before gently disengaging. Her dark eyes, swimming with unshed tears, held a message that needed no translation. This isn't over. The morning light filtered through the blinds of Principal Sanders' office as he slid a typed notice across his desk. Maria stood before him, her posture straight despite the weight of the moment. She had arrived in a freshly pressed uniform, her only other one, the tears expertly mended but still visible if you knew where to look. "I'm sorry, Ms. Lucia," Sanders said, not meeting her eyes. "The board has decided to terminate your employment, effective immediately." Maria nodded once, her face betraying nothing. She'd been expecting this since the moment Evelyn Bradford's fingers had gripped her apron. She accepted the termination notice, folded it carefully and placed it in her worn canvas bag alongside her few personal belongings from the custodial closet. As she walked the long corridor one last time, students paused their morning routines to stare. The video had spread overnight like wildfire. Evelyn's cruelty, Sophia's defense, the mysterious suggestion that the mute cleaning lady had saved the reclusive student. In less than 12 hours, the clip had amassed millions of views. Justice for Maria was trending nationally. But Maria noticed none of this digital storm. Her world remained one of tactile realities, the smooth coolness of the banister beneath her fingertips as she descended the main staircase one final time, the weight of her bag against her hip, the morning sun warming her face as she pushed through the heavy front doors. And there, sitting cross-legged on the stone steps of the academy's entrance, was Sophia. The girl wore her uniform with characteristic imprecision, tie askew, socks mismatched, hair escaping its ponytail. But her eyes were clear and determined. Maria paused, surprised. School had started 30 minutes ago. Sophia should have been in class. The girl stood and extended something, a spiral-bound notebook with a worn blue cover. Its pages were filled with drawings and scribbled words. Some entries dated back months, others years. Maria accepted it hesitantly. "I've been keeping track," Sophia said quietly. Her words meant only for Maria's eyes to read on her lips. "Everything I saw, everything I heard when they thought I wasn't listening, everything they did when they thought no one was watching." Maria's fingers trembled as she opened the notebook to a random page. A childish but detailed drawing showed a shadowy figure standing over a smaller one. Names were scrawled in the margins, dates, times, places within the school where security cameras didn't reach. "Thank you for protecting me," Sophia continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Nobody knows what happened, but I do." She tapped the notebook. "And now, everyone else will too." A chill ran down Maria's spine that had nothing to do with the morning breeze. What had started as an act of public humiliation was unraveling into something far more dangerous, a long-buried secret threatening to surface. As if on cue, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The tinted window lowered to reveal Evelyn Bradford's perfectly composed face. Not a trace of last night's public embarrassment visible in her expression. "This isn't over," the billionaire mouthed, her eyes cold as winter. Maria clutched the notebook tighter against her chest. For once, she and Evelyn Bradford were in perfect agreement. It had only just begun. The dirt road stretched before Maria like a weathered ribbon, disappearing into the horizon where the Tennessee hills met the fiery canvas of the setting sun. Each step stirred up small clouds of dust that clung to the hem of her worn skirt. The termination notice in her bag seemed to grow heavier with each mile, but her spine remained straight, her chin lifted, a silent defiance against the world that had once again tried to erase her. The roadside wildflowers had begun closing their petals for the night, mirroring the weariness Maria felt deep in her bones. 7 years of invisibility had taken its toll. 7 years of watching, waiting, protecting from the shadows. 7 years of burying her true self beneath layers of silence and servitude. Mrs. Patel's boarding house appeared around the bend, a modest 2-story building with peeling yellow paint and a wraparound porch, where elderly residents sat in creaking rocking chairs, watching the world go by. They nodded to Maria as she climbed the steps. Unlike the wealthy parents at Westbrook Academy, these people saw her. They noticed when she missed dinner or worked double shifts. They saved her portions of their home-cooked meals and left them covered on her doorstep. Her room was the smallest in the house, just big enough for a narrow bed, a nightstand, and a dresser with a cracked mirror. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet as she crossed to the window. The fading light cast long shadows across the faded floral wallpaper. Maria lowered herself to her knees and reached beneath the bed, pulling out a metal lockbox covered in a thin layer of dust. Her fingers trembled as they traced the combination lock. 0413, Sophia's birthday. The mechanism clicked open, revealing contents untouched for years. A laminated ID badge with a younger Maria's face smiling confidently back at her. Dr. Maria Lucia, Ph.D., Child Psychology, printed beneath. A folded white lab coat with embroidered initials, and a sealed envelope yellowed with age addressed to the parents of Sophia Jenkins. Maria lifted the envelope, feeling its weight. Not just the paper inside, but the burden of truth it contained. 7 years ago she had written this letter, intending to expose what she had witnessed. 7 years ago she had lost her nerve, choosing instead to stay close, to watch, to protect from within. She struck a match and held the flame to the corner of the envelope. The paper caught quickly, curling and blackening. She dropped it into the metal trash can and watched as her written testimony turned to ash. Words had failed her before. This time she would need more than words. Maria reached for the ID badge and lab coat. Not to hide, but to remember. To reclaim the person she had been. The respected child psychologist who had sacrificed everything to protect one vulnerable girl. The decision crystallized in her mind like frost on a winter morning. She would not run. Not this time. The public library hummed with quiet activity as Maria pushed through the glass doors the following morning. Teenagers hunched over laptops. Retirees browsed newspaper racks. Children sprawled on colorful rugs in the reading corner. Maria made her way to the information desk where Ms. Winters, the head librarian, greeted her with a warm smile. "Maria, I was just reading about you online. That awful Bradford woman." Maria shook her head quickly, cutting off the librarian's indignation. She pulled out a notepad and wrote in careful block letters, "I need help making a video." 30 minutes later, Maria sat before a library computer, its camera light blinking red. Ms. Winters stood beside her, adjusting the frame. "Whenever you're ready," the librarian whispered. Maria's hands began to move, forming the elegant shapes and patterns of American Sign Language. Her face, normally guarded and expressionless, now animated with emotion. Her eyes, usually downcast, now looked directly into the camera, into the eyes of whoever would watch this testimony. Ms. Winters, who had taken ASL classes to better serve the community, translated softly as Maria signed, "My name is Dr. Maria Lucia. 7 years ago, I was a child psychologist at Riverstone Children's Center. I witnessed something that changed my life forever. I reported it through proper channels. Nothing happened. The powerful protected the powerful. So I made a choice." Maria's hands moved faster, more urgently. "I gave up my career, my voice, my identity. I took a job where I could watch, where I could be near enough to protect. I became invisible because invisibility was my only power. But invisibility comes at a cost." A tear slid down Maria's cheek, but her hands never faltered. "A child found her voice today. She spoke when I could not. Now I must honor her courage with my own. This is not about revenge. This is about truth. This is about all the children who have no voice, who have no protector. This is about breaking the silence." As Ms. Winters ended the recording, a young man approached them. He wore a Westbrook Academy uniform and clutched his phone nervously. "You're the cleaning lady from the video," he said to Maria. I have a YouTube channel. Not a big one, but could I post your message? People should hear it." Maria studied him for a moment, then nodded once. The boy's fingers flew across his phone screen. Miles away in her penthouse apartment overlooking the city, Evelyn Bradford scrolled through her news alerts. Her perfectly manicured nail paused over a thumbnail image. Maria Lucia, looking directly into the camera, hands raised in what Evelyn recognized as sign language. The video had been posted 10 minutes ago. It already had thousands of views. "Gerald!" she barked, summoning her attorney from the next room. "I want that mute woman buried in lawsuits by morning. Defamation, slander, invasion of privacy, whatever it takes." But as Gerald retreated to make the necessary calls, Evelyn remained frozen before the screen, watching Maria's hands tell their silent story. Something in the woman's eyes triggered a memory Evelyn had worked hard to suppress. She reached for a hidden compartment in her desk drawer and withdrew a photograph, faded and creased from being handled too many times. In the photo, a younger Evelyn stood beside a group of smiling professionals in white coats. She began methodically tearing at the edges, removing one figure after another, until only a fragment remained. Just enough to identify the face of Dr. Maria Lucia, back when she had been someone to reckon with, back before Evelyn Bradford had destroyed her life. The morning light filtered through the dusty blinds of Maria's small room, casting tiger-striped shadows across her bed. She hadn't slept. The video, her silent testimony, had exploded online overnight. Her phone, an ancient flip model she kept for emergencies, had buzzed incessantly until the battery died. Even Mrs. Patel, who typically respected her tenant's privacy, had knocked softly around midnight to tell her that reporters were gathering outside. Maria sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by printouts of news articles and social media posts. The young Westbrook student who had uploaded her video had included captions, making her silent testimony accessible to millions. The truth is, silent and Maria's voice were trending nationwide. A knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. Mrs. Patel stood there, concern etched in the lines around her eyes. "There's someone here to see you," she whispered. "A teacher from the school. I told her you weren't taking visitors, but she insisted. Says it's important." Maria hesitated, then nodded. Mrs. Patel disappeared, returning moments later with a slender woman in her 40s, her auburn hair pulled back in a sensible bun, wire-rimmed glasses perched on her nose. Ms. Eleanor Paxton, Westbrook Academy's longest-serving English teacher. "I'm sorry to intrude," Ms. Paxton said, hovering uncertainly in the doorway. She clutched a manila envelope to her chest like a shield. "I wouldn't have come if it wasn't. I've been at Westbrook for 23 years. I've seen administrations come and go. I've watched families like the Bradfords buy their way into power, pushing out good people, changing policies to serve themselves." Maria gestured for her to sit in the room's only chair, a threadbare armchair that had seen better decades. "I should have spoken up years ago," Ms. Paxton continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, even though they were alone. "But I needed the job. My mother's care facility. Well, that doesn't matter now." She thrust the envelope toward Maria. "What matters is that you have these." Maria accepted the envelope, raising an eyebrow in question. "Complaint records," Ms. Paxton explained. "Copies I made before they disappeared from the official files. Student reports, parent concerns, staff observations, all involving certain faculty members, all mysteriously resolved without investigation once the Bradford family became major donors." Maria's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside were dozens of printed emails, handwritten notes, and formal complaints, all meticulously organized by date. She rifled through them, scanning names and dates, until one report made her breath catch. A formal complaint filed by a school counselor regarding David Bradford's inappropriate interactions with female students. The document was dated just weeks before Maria had abandoned her psychology practice and taken the janitorial position at Westbrook. "Ms. Paxton watched Maria's face closely. "You recognized his name in there, didn't you? David Bradford, Evelyn's precious son. The complaint was filed by a counselor who was dismissed 2 days later for budget cuts. The girl who reported him transferred schools the following week." A cold weight settled in Maria's stomach as she continued leafing through the documents. Pattern after pattern emerged. Complaints filed, witnesses transferred or fired, Bradford money ensuring silence. And at the center of it all, like a black hole consuming all light, was David Bradford, the man who now served as Westbrook's Director of Student Affairs, the man who had access to every vulnerable child in that school, including Sophia. "There's something else you should know," Ms. Paxton said, leaning forward, her voice barely audible. "Sophia isn't the first student he's shown special interest in, but she might be the first with someone like you watching over her." Maria's jaw tightened. She reached for her notepad and scrawled, "Thank you. Dangerous for you to be here." Ms. Paxton smiled grimly. "I submitted my resignation this morning. 23 years, and I couldn't look at myself in the mirror one more day knowing I'd stayed silent. Your courage gave me mine." As the teacher left, Maria spread the documents across her bed, her mind racing. The evidence was damning, but fragmented. Emails without responses, complaints without resolutions, witness statements without follow-up. Nothing that would stand up in court against the Bradford legal team. She needed more. She needed someone who could give these fragments a voice. Across town, in the bustling newsroom of the Tennessee Truth, investigative reporter Jackson Mitchell hunched over his laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. At 42, with salt and pepper hair and perpetually rumpled shirts, he had built his career exposing corruption in local politics. The Bradford family had been on his radar for years, but they were untouchable, until now. "Mitchell," his editor's voice boomed across the room. "That cleaning lady video is at 5 million views. I want you on it. Find out who she really is." Jackson nodded, already deep into his research. The woman's face had seemed familiar from the first moment he'd seen the viral video. Now he knew why. 7 years ago, Dr. Maria Lucia had been a rising star in child psychology, with published papers and speaking engagements around the country. Her work on identifying early signs of childhood trauma had been groundbreaking, and then she had simply disappeared. Until now, when she resurfaced as a mute janitor at an elite private school, with a silent accusation that threatened to bring down one of Tennessee's most powerful families. "This doesn't add up," Jackson muttered, scrolling through archived news articles. Dr. Lucia had last been seen at a conference in Boston, presenting research on institutional responses to child abuse allegations. 3 days later, her practice closed abruptly. Her home was sold. Her professional licenses lapsed. It was as if she had been erased. Jackson reached for his phone, dialing a trusted contact in the state licensing board. "Hey Sandra, it's Mitchell. I need everything you've got on a Dr. Maria Lucia, child psychologist from about 7 years back." "Yeah," the cleaning lady from the video. "I think there's a lot more to this story than a torn apron." As evening fell, Jackson pulled into the gravel parking lot of Mrs. Patel's boarding house. The reporters who had camped out earlier had dispersed, chasing fresher angles. He approached the door, press credentials in hand, rehearsing his pitch. But before he could knock, the door opened. Maria stood there as if she had been expecting him. Without a word, she handed him a sealed envelope. "Dr. Lucia," Jackson began, "I have questions about—" She shook her head firmly, pointing to the envelope, then touching her lips, the universal sign for silence. Then she closed the door, leaving Jackson alone on the porch with an envelope that felt too light to contain the answers he sought. Back in his car, he tore it open. Inside was a single photograph, a baby, perhaps a year old, with wispy blonde hair and bright blue eyes. The child sat on the lap of a younger Maria, both smiling at the camera. Jackson flipped the photo over. Written in careful script on the back was a single name: Sophia. The photograph burned in Jackson Mitchell's pocket as he drove through the rain-slicked streets of downtown. Streetlights reflected in puddles, creating the illusion of a world turned upside down. How fitting, he thought, for a story where nothing was as it seemed. The Tennessee Truth newsroom hummed with late-night energy, the clicking of keyboards, the occasional ring of a phone, the hiss of the ancient coffee machine producing what the staff only half-jokingly called printer ink. Jackson slipped past the night editor's office, avoiding questions he wasn't ready to answer. At his desk, he spread out his research materials, news clippings about Dr. Maria Lucia's acclaimed work in child psychology, her disappearance from professional circles 7 years ago, the meteoric rise of the Bradford family's influence at Westbrook Academy during the same period, and now, this photograph of Maria with baby Sophia. But something was missing. The connection. The why. Jackson pulled up the school's archived newsletters. He scrolled back 7 years, searching for any mention of Sophia Jenkins. Nothing. He switched to local news archives, and there it was. A small announcement in the society pages. Businessman Robert Jenkins and wife Amanda welcome daughter Sophia Elena. The timing aligned perfectly with the photo. His phone buzzed. A text from his contact at the state licensing board. "Found something strange. Call me." 10 minutes later, Jackson sat frozen, the phone still pressed to his ear. According to his contact, Dr. Maria Lucia had voluntarily surrendered her psychology license 7 years ago, citing personal reasons. But the paperwork had been processed through the legal department of Bradford Industries, Evelyn Bradford's company. Why would a corporate legal team handle a private practitioner's license surrender? His contact had asked. Unless they were forcing her out, the pieces were starting to fit together, forming a picture darker than Jackson had imagined. He reached for his jacket, decision made. It was time to confront the only person who could confirm his suspicions. Evelyn Bradford's penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of the city's most exclusive high-rise. The private elevator required a keycard, but Jackson had cultivated sources throughout his career, including a maintenance worker with access to every floor. "Mrs. Bradford," he called, knocking firmly on the ornate double doors. "Jackson Mitchell from the Tennessee Truth. I think it's time we talked about Dr. Maria Lucia." The door swung open to reveal not Evelyn but David Bradford, his normally polished appearance disheveled, eyes bloodshot. Behind him, Evelyn paced the marble-floored living room, a tumbler of amber liquid clutched in her manicured hand. "You've got some nerve," David snarled, attempting to close the door. Jackson wedged his foot in the gap. I have evidence connecting your family to the forced resignation of Dr. Lucia 7 years ago. I also have evidence suggesting why. Would you prefer I publish what I know, or would you like to give your side? Evelyn appeared behind her son, her face a frozen mask of composure despite the slight tremor in her hand. Let him in, David. Perhaps it's time we address this situation. The penthouse was a showcase of wealth. Priceless art, designer furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city lights below. Evelyn gestured toward a white leather sofa, but Jackson remained standing. You destroyed a woman's career, he stated flatly. I want to know why. Destroyed? Evelyn laughed, the sound brittle as thin ice. We saved her. She was making wild accusations, unsubstantiated claims that would have ruined her professionally when they were inevitably disproven. We offered her a dignified exit. And employment as a janitor at the same school your son happens to direct? That's your idea of dignity? David stepped forward, fists clenched. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Jackson pulled out the photograph, holding it just out of reach. Dr. Lucia with baby Sophia. Why would a child psychologist with no apparent connection to your family surrender her license through your legal department, then take a menial job at your son's school? Unless she was watching someone, protecting someone. Evelyn's composure cracked. You think my son? Her voice faltered as she turned to David, really looking at him perhaps for the first time. David? What is he implying? David's face flushed red. He's implying nothing, Mother. He's fishing for a story where there isn't one. But doubt had crept into Evelyn's eyes. The girl, Sophia. She said Maria saved her. From what, David? From whom? The tension in the room thickened as mother and son stared at each other. Years of assumptions and blind loyalty suddenly called into question. Did you? Evelyn's voice dropped to a whisper. Did you do something to that child? David's laugh was hollow. Of course not. This is absurd. That woman is clearly unstable. Her name was on 3 separate complaints. Jackson interrupted. All mysteriously resolved after your family's donations to the school increased. Evelyn's glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor. Whiskey splashed across her designer heels, but she didn't seem to notice. Tell me this isn't true, she demanded, grabbing her son's arm. Tell me you aren't the reason that woman has been haunting our lives for 7 years. David wrenched away from her grasp. You're being hysterical. This reporter is manipulating you just like that mute janitor is manipulating the public. They want our money, Mother. That's all anyone ever wants from us. But Evelyn wasn't listening anymore. She moved to a decorative box on the mantel, withdrawing a key from around her neck. The box opened to reveal a stack of papers, checks written to various families over the years, all bearing the same memo line. Settlement agreement. All these years, she whispered, more to herself than to the men in the room. All these payments I authorized. You told me they were nuisance claims, people trying to extort us because of our wealth. David's face drained of color. Mother, you need to stop talking. Now. Jackson stepped forward, phone recording in his pocket. Mrs. Bradford, are you saying you funded settlements for complaints against your son? Evelyn's gaze hardened as she looked at David, truly seeing him perhaps for the first time. I thought I was protecting my family's reputation from gold diggers. I never questioned, I never wanted to see. Her voice broke. How many, David? How many children? Before David could respond, Evelyn's phone chimed with a news alert. Her hands shook as she read the screen. Breaking. Former Westbrook administrator reveals pattern of covered-up abuse allegations against director David Bradford. Across town, Maria sat in the modest living room of Amanda Jenkins, Sophia's mother. The woman dabbed at her eyes with a tissue as she stared at the documents spread before her. I never knew, she whispered. Robert handled everything with the school. He said Sophia's behavioral changes were just her autism manifesting differently as she grew older. He said the specialists all agreed. Maria wrote carefully on her notepad. Your husband took Bradford money. Agreed to silence. Amanda's sob caught in her throat. He left us 3 years ago, said he couldn't handle raising a special needs child anymore. I never knew. I never suspected. Maria reached across the coffee table, grasping the woman's trembling hands in her own weathered ones. On the TV behind them, the breaking news showed Evelyn Bradford being escorted from her penthouse by police, her face ashen with shock, while officers led a handcuffed David Bradford to a separate vehicle. The Westbrook Academy auditorium buzzed with tension. Camera crews from every major network jostled for position along the walls. The carefully orchestrated press conference, hastily arranged by the school board to address recent allegations, was scheduled to begin in 5 minutes. The front row was reserved for distinguished guests, attorneys in $1,000 suits, board members with carefully practiced expressions of concern, and Evelyn Bradford, out on bail, but maintaining her public persona with military precision. Her Chanel suit was impeccable, her makeup flawless, her blonde hair swept into a smooth chignon. Only the slight tremor in her hands as she adjusted her pearl earrings betrayed her inner turmoil. Beside her sat a legal team 3 persons deep, Bradford Industries attorneys flanking David's criminal defense lawyer. David himself appeared surprisingly composed for a man facing multiple allegations of misconduct. His navy suit was pressed, his tie perfectly centered, his smile practiced as he nodded to familiar faces in the crowd. 7 years of hiding in plain sight had made him an expert at projecting innocence. "We'll stick to the script," his attorney murmured, leaning close. "Technical denials, character witnesses, emphasis on your charitable work. The DA hasn't filed formal charges yet. This is just damage control." At the back of the auditorium, Maria slipped in through a side door, unnoticed by the security team focused on controlling the media frenzy. She wore simple street clothes, jeans and a faded blue blouse, rather than the janitor's uniform that had become her public identity. Without the context of her role, she was just another face in the crowd, exactly as she had been for 7 years. Sophia sat in the middle row, hands folded primly in her lap. Her mother, Amanda, sat beside her, pale but determined, occasionally touching her daughter's shoulder as if to reassure herself that Sophia was really there, was really safe. The girl's eyes found Maria immediately, as if drawn by some invisible thread connecting them through the chaos. A school administrator approached the podium, tapping the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Westbrook Academy takes any allegation of misconduct with the utmost seriousness. Today, we've gathered to address recent claims and to reaffirm our commitment to student safety. I'd like to invite Mrs. Evelyn Bradford to speak first, followed by our legal counsel." Evelyn rose, the epitome of dignified concern. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady, each word carefully measured. "As a mother, a donor, and a longtime supporter of Westbrook Academy, I am deeply troubled by the allegations being circulated by certain individuals with questionable motives." Her gaze swept the room, lingering briefly on the reporters. "My son, David Bradford, has dedicated his career to education and youth development. The claims being made against him are not only false, but malicious." She paused, allowing her words to sink in before continuing. "I understand that the woman at the center of these claims, a former employee terminated for poor performance, has been spreading her story through social media. What you may not know is that this individual has a history of mental health issues and harbors a personal vendetta against my family." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Maria's face remained expressionless, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped the edge of her seat. "We have evidence," Evelyn continued smoothly, "that this woman fabricated her credentials, misrepresented her background, and has been systematically manipulating vulnerable students for her own agenda. We intend to pursue legal action against her for defamation, invasion of privacy, and endangering the welfare of minors through her reckless accusations." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. This was no mere denial. It was a counterattack, designed to destroy whatever credibility Maria had built. David approached the podium next, his expression somber, his voice catching with practiced emotion. "I've devoted my life to helping young people reach their potential. These accusations have been devastating, not just to me and my family, but to the entire Westbrook community. I categorically deny any impropriety with any student at any time." He leaned forward, his eyes scanning the crowd with calculated sincerity. "The truth is, I tried to help Sophia Jenkins. As many of you know, she struggles with autism. When her father abandoned the family, I arranged a special scholarship so she could continue her education here. I assigned our best staff to support her unique needs. And this is how I'm repaid, with lies crafted by a disgruntled former employee with no credibility and no evidence." The press began shouting questions, cameras flashing like lightning in a storm. The school's attorney stepped up, fielding inquiries with practiced deflections. "No, we cannot comment on ongoing investigations." "Yes, Mr. Bradford continues to enjoy the full support of the board. No, there have never been any substantiated claims of misconduct in his file. Maria watched it all unfold with a calm that came from knowing what would happen next. The script was predictable. Powerful people closing ranks, rewriting history, transforming victims into villains. She had seen it before, had lived it before, but this time was different. A movement at the center of the auditorium caught everyone's attention. Sophia had risen from her seat, her thin frame vibrating with tension. Amanda tried to pull her back, whispering urgently, but the girl shook off her mother's hand. "Excuse me," Sophia said, her voice small but clear in the momentary lull. No one responded. No one expected the autistic girl, the one who rarely spoke, who avoided eye contact, who flinched at loud noises, to have anything to contribute. She took a deep breath and tried again, louder this time. "Excuse me." The room fell silent, all eyes turning toward the unlikely interruption. David's carefully constructed expression faltered for a fraction of a second before he recovered. "Sophia," he said warmly, "this isn't really the place for students to—" "You're lying," Sophia interrupted, her voice gaining strength with each word. "You're lying about everything. About Maria. About me. About what you did." The silence in the room deepened, became something tangible, something dangerous. "Sophia, honey," Amanda began, rising to stand beside her daughter. "Maybe we should—" "No, Mom." Sophia's hands were trembling, but her voice was steady. "I'm tired of being quiet. I'm tired of being afraid." She turned to face the press directly. "Maria Lucia protected me from him." She pointed at David, whose face had gone ashen. "She watched over me when no one else would. She believed me when no one else did." She took a step toward the podium, toward the man who had haunted her nightmares for years. "You knew," she said, addressing Evelyn directly. "You knew what he was doing. You covered it up. You paid my father to keep quiet. You threatened other families. You made everyone too scared to speak up." Evelyn swayed slightly, gripping the edge of the table for support. "This is outrageous," she managed, but her voice had lost its authoritative edge. "This troubled child is clearly—" "I was 12 years old." Sophia's voice cracked with emotion. "I was 12 and he was the director and no one would listen. No one except Maria. She saw. She knew. She stayed to protect me when everyone else looked away." Cameras swiveled between Sophia, the Bradfords, and Maria, who had risen from her seat, her expression a mixture of pride and anguish as she watched the young girl finally reclaim her voice. David lunged for the microphone. "This is a complete fabrication," he insisted, desperation creeping into his tone. "This child is mentally unstable. Her condition makes her susceptible to suggestion. That woman," he jabbed a finger toward Maria, "has been manipulating her, coaching her. Check the supply closet on the 3rd floor." Sophia cut in, her voice ringing through the auditorium. "The one behind the science lab. Check for fingerprints. Check for DNA. Check the dates in my notebook against the school security logs. Check how many times he took me there for special tutoring when everyone else had gone home." The room erupted in chaos. Reporters shouted questions. Photographers' flashes created a strobe-like effect. Security personnel moved toward David, who had gone deathly pale. Evelyn collapsed into her chair, her carefully constructed facade crumbling completely. And through it all, Maria remained standing, silent tears streaming down her face as she watched 7 years of vigilance, of sacrifice, of waiting, finally bear fruit in the courage of a girl who had found her voice at last. 3 weeks after the press conference, David Bradford sat in a county jail cell awaiting trial, denied bail due to flight risk. Forensic teams had found exactly what Sophia described in the 3rd floor supply closet. 5 other former students had come forward with similar stories. The Bradford empire was crumbling like a sandcastle at high tide. Evelyn Bradford's fall from grace had been equally spectacular. Removed from the boards of 3 Fortune 500 companies, dropped from charity committees, unfollowed on social media by former allies, the social death that terrified her more than any legal consequence. The woman who once commanded rooms with her presence now slipped through service entrances to avoid photographers, her designer wardrobe replaced by nondescript clothing that wouldn't attract attention. Maria, meanwhile, had become something of a reluctant folk hero. The silent guardian, the media called her. Talk shows clamored for interviews. Publishers offered book deals. Hollywood producers pitched movie rights. A prestigious university had offered her a fully funded position to return to psychology research. She had declined them all. On this crisp autumn morning, Maria sat alone on a park bench, watching golden leaves spiral down from maple trees. The same park bench where 7 years ago, she had made the decision that altered the course of her life. The weight of that choice, to surrender her voice, her career, her identity, had pressed on her for so long that its absence left her feeling strangely untethered. Her phone buzzed with yet another interview request. She silenced it without looking. Freedom, she was discovering, came with its own kind of noise. "Dr. Lucia?" Maria looked up to find Jackson Mitchell standing before her, notepad conspicuously absent for the first time since she'd met the reporter. "Don't worry," he said, interpreting her wary expression. "I'm off duty, just wanted to check in." He gestured to the empty space beside her. "May I?" She nodded, shifting slightly to make room. "The DA's office believes they have enough evidence for multiple convictions," Jackson said, keeping his voice low even though no one was nearby. "They've found settlement records going back a decade. Turns out Evelyn Bradford was better at record-keeping than covering tracks." Maria's expression remained neutral. This wasn't news to her. She had suspected the extent of the cover-up from the beginning. "What I don't understand," Jackson continued, studying her profile, "is why you're not capitalizing on any of this. CNN offered 6 figures for an exclusive. That tell-all book deal would set you up for life. Most people in your position would be taking a victory lap." Maria turned to him fully, her dark eyes meeting his with an intensity that made him look away first. She pulled out the small notepad she still carried and wrote, "Some victories aren't for celebrating." Jackson read her note and nodded slowly. "Fair enough. But what happens now? You spent 7 years of your life dedicated to exposing this. Mission accomplished. What's next for Maria Lucia?" It was a question she'd been asking herself since the moment Sophia had stood up at that press conference. For so long, her purpose had been singular, her identity defined by what she was fighting against, rather than what she was living for. Now, with that purpose fulfilled, she felt both liberated and adrift. She wrote again, still deciding. "Well," Jackson said, rising from the bench, "when you figure it out, I'd still like to tell your story. The real story, not the Hollywood version. Whenever you're ready." He handed her his card, even though she already had his number. No pressure. Maria tucked the card into her pocket with a small nod of acknowledgement. As Jackson walked away, she returned her gaze to the falling leaves. Their brief, beautiful descent, a reminder that endings and beginnings were often the same thing viewed from different perspectives. Later that afternoon, Maria stood on the porch of a modest suburban home, her finger hovering over the doorbell. Before she could press it, the door swung open to reveal Amanda Jenkins, Sophia's mother, looking surprised but pleased. "Maria, I wasn't expecting you today. Come in, come in." The house was warm and cluttered in the way homes with children often are. Textbooks spread across the dining table, a half-finished art project on the coffee table, photographs covering nearly every inch of wall space. It smelled of cinnamon and coffee, of safety and permanence, all the things Maria had denied herself for 7 years. Amanda led her to the kitchen, chattering nervously as she put on a kettle for tea. "Sophia's at her therapy session. The new one, Dr. Torres. She's wonderful. Sophia actually looks forward to going, can you believe it? After everything. Well, I wasn't sure she'd ever trust a therapist again." Maria nodded, taking a seat at the kitchen island. Amanda's nervous energy was understandable. They had spoken only a handful of times since the press conference, each interaction weighted with the unspoken history between them. A history where one woman had known more about the other's child than she herself had. "I've been meaning to call you," Amanda said, setting 2 mugs on the counter. "The investigators finished with Sophia's notebook last week. They said we could have it back, but I thought maybe you should be the one to decide what happens to it." She slid a package across the counter, Sophia's blue spiral notebook, now sealed in an evidence bag, its pages having provided the timeline that corroborated the case against David Bradford. Maria's hands trembled slightly as she touched the plastic. Inside that notebook was a record of pain, of betrayal, of a child's desperate attempt to be heard in a world determined not to listen. It was also, in its way, a testament to resilience, to Sophia's, and to her own. Amanda's eyes filled with tears as she watched Maria examine the package. "I never thanked you properly," she whispered, "for seeing what I didn't see, For staying when you could have gone anywhere else? For being the eyes and ears and voice my daughter needed when I failed her? But Maria shook her head firmly, reaching across the counter to grasp Amanda's hand. She pulled out her notepad and wrote, "You didn't fail her. The system failed you both." Amanda wiped her eyes with her free hand. "Maybe, but you didn't. And we want you to know that you have a place here. Always. Sophia asks about you every day. This house has felt more like a home since you came into our lives, even in the midst of all this chaos." She slid an envelope across the counter. "It's not much, but it's a start, if you wanted it." Maria opened the envelope to find a house key along with a handwritten letter. Her eyes scanned the heartfelt words. Amanda's gratitude, her offer of the guest cottage behind the main house, her hope that Maria might consider becoming a permanent part of their lives, not as an employee or a guardian, but as family. For the first time in 7 years, Maria felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been sealed away for so long she had almost forgotten it existed. Not just purpose, but belonging. Not just justice, but peace. She looked up at Amanda, tears streaming unchecked down her face, and nodded once. A gesture so simple yet so profound that Amanda rounded the counter and embraced her, both women finding in each other's arms the solace that comes from shared survival. That evening, Maria returned to Mrs. Patel's boarding house for the last time. She packed her few belongings into the same canvas bag she had carried to Westbrook Academy on her first day as a janitor. But as she prepared to close the metal lockbox that had held her secrets for so long, she paused. The old lab coat and ID badge lay inside, artifacts from a life that had seemed lost forever. She touched them gently, these remnants of Dr. Maria Lucia, child psychologist. Then with deliberate movements, she took out the lab coat and slipped it on over her simple blouse. It still fit, though the fabric had yellowed slightly with age. She stood before the cracked mirror, studying her reflection, the silver threading her dark hair, the lines at the corners of her eyes, the quiet dignity that had sustained her through 7 years of silence. Dr. Maria Lucia hadn't disappeared after all. She had simply been waiting, watching, protecting, until it was safe to return. 6 months had passed since the Bradford scandal broke. Winter had given way to spring, and spring had blossomed into early summer. The morning sun filtered through tall windows of Riverside Elementary, casting golden rectangles across freshly waxed floors. The hallways, empty of children for the summer break, echoed with Maria's footsteps as she made her way to the school's administrative office. This wasn't Westbrook Academy with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Riverside served a working-class neighborhood where parents juggled multiple jobs and children often arrived hungry. The paint was faded in places, the furniture well-worn, but there was warmth here that Westbrook, for all its opulence, had lacked. "Dr. Lucia," the principal, Ellen Chen, greeted Maria with a genuine smile. "Right on time. The volunteers are already setting up in the multi-purpose room." Maria nodded, returning the smile. After the Bradford case concluded, she had begun volunteering at local public schools, developing trauma-informed care programs for educators. She still didn't speak. Her vocal cords had atrophied after 7 years of disuse, but she had reclaimed every other aspect of her professional identity. Her hands, once relegated to scrubbing floors, now communicated complex psychological concepts through sign language, with trained interpreters translating for those who couldn't understand. The multipurpose room buzzed with activity as teachers arranged chairs and distributed materials for the workshop. Maria's gaze swept over the space, taking in the motivational posters, the art projects displayed on bulletin boards, the small stage at the far end where school plays and assemblies were held. So different from the sterile elegance of Westbrook, yet infinitely more alive. She set her materials on the front table, handouts, reference books, her laptop for the presentation. From her bag she withdrew the white lab coat she now wore for these sessions, a symbol of her return to the profession she had been forced to abandon. As she slipped it on, a small ache of remembrance tugged at her heart. 7 years of silence, 7 years of watching from the shadows, 7 years of waiting for justice. The door at the back of the room opened, drawing her attention. Sophia stood there, a tentative smile on her face, a wrapped package in her hands. At 14, she had grown taller in the months since the trial, her blonde hair now cut in a stylish bob, her blue eyes clearer, less haunted. The weekly therapy sessions were helping. So was time. So was seeing her abuser face consequences for his actions. "Hi, Dr. Lucia," Sophia said, crossing the room with newfound confidence. "Mom dropped me off. She said to tell you she'll pick us both up for lunch after your workshop." Maria's face brightened at the sight of the girl. She raised her hands, signing rapidly. "You look wonderful. How was your math test?" Sophia, who had been learning sign language with remarkable speed, grinned. "Aced it. Turns out I'm pretty good at math when I'm not constantly terrified." The blunt honesty made Maria both wince and feel proud. Sophia's ability to articulate her trauma was a sign of healing, of reclaiming her narrative. "I brought you something," Sophia continued, holding out the package. "I made it myself. Well, Mom helped with the sewing machine, but I did the design." Maria unwrapped the gift carefully, revealing a folded apron. Not the utilitarian gray one she had worn as a janitor, but a professional one in crisp white cotton, similar to those worn by lab technicians or art teachers. Embroidered on the pocket in delicate blue thread was a simple message. "You taught me to speak without words. Now it's my turn." Emotion swelled in Maria's chest, bringing unexpected tears to her eyes. She ran her fingers over the stitching, remembering the torn uniform that had started it all. The moment when Evelyn Bradford had exposed Maria's makeshift undergarments to a room full of wealthy parents, never suspecting that her act of cruelty would ultimately expose her family's darkest secrets. She looked up at Sophia, who was watching her reaction intently. Maria signed, "It's perfect. I'll wear it today." As she slipped the apron over her lab coat, Maria reflected on the symmetry of the moment. Once she had protected Sophia by becoming invisible. Now Sophia had helped make her visible again, had restored the dignity that wealth and power had tried to strip away. The workshop participants began filing in. Teachers, counselors, school nurses, all eager to learn how to better serve children who carried invisible wounds. Maria took her place at the front of the room, her interpreter beside her, ready to translate her silent expertise into spoken words. As she began her presentation on recognizing signs of trauma in children, Maria was acutely aware of Sophia sitting in the back row, watching with attentive eyes. The girl who had found her voice was now witnessing her former protector reclaim her purpose. Afterward, as the participants mingled over coffee and asked follow-up questions, a school custodian entered the room to empty the trash bins. He moved quietly along the perimeter, head down, trying not to disturb the professional gathering. Maria noticed how the others unconsciously stepped aside for him without really seeing him, how he became almost invisible in their midst, just as she had been at Westbrook. When he reached her, Maria made a point of meeting his eyes and smiling warmly. She signed, "Thank you," a gesture universal enough to be understood without translation. The man looked startled, then pleased, nodding in acknowledgement before continuing his rounds. Sophia, who had observed the interaction, appeared at Maria's side. "You see them," she said quietly. "The people everyone else looks past. You always have." Maria nodded, signing, "Because I was one of them, and because seeing is the first step toward change." Outside, Amanda's car pulled up to the curb. Sophia gathered her things, then hesitated. "Dr. Torres says I'm making good progress," she said, a hint of pride in her voice. She thinks maybe I could help other kids someday. Kids like me. I was thinking about taking psychology in college." Maria's heart swelled with a complex mixture of emotions. Pride, hope, a touch of protective concern. She signed, "You would be wonderful at it. Your experience gives you insight most people never develop." "That's what Dr. Torres said." Sophia fidgeted with the strap of her backpack. "But I'd need a mentor, someone who understands both the academic side and the other stuff, the real stuff." The implication hung in the air between them. Maria felt herself standing at another crossroads, another life-altering decision. 7 years ago, she had chosen to step away from her career to protect one child. Now that same child, no longer a victim but a survivor, was inviting her to step back into that role, not just for herself but for others. Maria signed, her movements deliberate and clear. "I would be honored." As they walked together toward Amanda's waiting car, Maria felt the weight of the apron against her lab coat. Two symbols of identity now merged into something new. The silent guardian and the respected professional, no longer separated but integrated, whole. The camera pulls back, showing Maria and Sophia from a distance as they cross the sunlit schoolyard. A narrator's voice, deep and resonant, speaks over the image. Some people are remembered for the noise they make in the world. others for the silence they fill when it matters most. And sometimes the greatest acts of courage happen with no words at all, in the spaces between what we say and what we do, in the quiet moments when one person chooses to see another's pain and says, without speaking, "You are not alone." The screen fades to black, leaving only the echo of those words and the lasting image of two figures walking side by side, the woman who had surrendered her voice to protect a child, and the child who had found her voice to save them both. Maria Lucia's journey reminds us that true heroism rarely wears a cape. Sometimes it wears a janitor's uniform. For 7 years, she surrendered her voice to protect a child when no one else would listen. She traded respect for invisibility, professional acclaim for silent vigilance. Would you have the courage to give up everything you are to protect someone who couldn't protect themselves? To become invisible so that someone else might one day be seen? In a world where wealth and power often dictate whose stories get told and whose truths get buried, Maria teaches us that dignity can't be torn away like a piece of fabric. It resides in the choices we make when no one is watching, or perhaps more importantly, in the choices we make when we think no one who matters is watching. Sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply bearing witness, standing firm in your truth, even when the whole world tries to sweep it under an expensive rug. The next time you encounter someone society has rendered invisible, the person cleaning your floors, serving your food, or standing silently in the background of your busy life, remember Maria. Remember that every person carries a story, a purpose, a dignity that no amount of money or power can purchase or destroy. If this story touched your heart, please follow our channel for more untold stories of everyday heroes. Like, share, and tell us in the comments, what would you risk to protect someone who couldn't protect themselves?